The first question might be, well, why is a lion a king, right? And because it makes sense to people that a lion could be a king. And of course, a lion is an apex predator, and so, which means it's at the top of the food chain, roughly speaking, and it's sort of golden like the sun, so that's also useful. And it has that mane that makes it look majestic, and of course, it's very physically powerful, and it's intimidating. And so it's something that you run away from as well, right? Or you're awestruck by. So the fact that, it's like Snail King just doesn't make any sense, right? But Lion King, that works. And you got to think about those things because it's not self-evident why a lion would work as a king, but a snail wouldn't. But it fits in with your metaphorical understanding of the way the world works much better. And so the Lion King makes sense. And when things like that aren't rationally self-evident make sense, you have to ask yourself, in what metaphorical context do they make sense? So you have the Lion King. Now the movie opens with a sunrise, and the sunrise is equivalent to the dawn of consciousness, so that in many archaic stories, the sun was a hero, like Horus, if I remember correctly, was a solar king, but Apollo in particular, but Apollo, Greek myth. The idea was that the sun was the hero who illuminated the sky in the day. And so heroism and illumination and enlightenment are all tangled together metaphorically. And then at night, what would happen would be that the sun would fight with the dragon of darkness, basically, or with evil all night, and then rise again victorious in the morning. And so it's a death and rebirth theme, and it's very, 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 very common mythological theme. And the reason the sun is associated with consciousness, as far as I can tell, is that we're not nocturnal creatures, right? We're awake during the day, and we're very, very visual. Half our brain is devoted to visual processing. And to be enlightened and illuminated means to develop, to move towards a higher state of consciousness, and we naturally use light symbolism to represent that, like the light bulb on the top of someone's head. You don't say, I was darkened when you learn something new. And so again, that fits into this underlying metaphorical substrate. And so this is how the movie starts. It starts with very expansive music as well, celebratory music. And that's to indicate to you, to set the tone for the movie, but also to indicate to you that you're about to watch something of import. And the opening scene is actually a real scene of genius in my estimation. The animators did a great job, and it goes along very nicely with the music. And so you see this lit place, and then you see this rock, Pride Rock, I believe it's called, in the middle of it, and it's the center. It's the center. It's like the spot that's marked by a cathedral, which is an X or a cross, and you're right in the middle of that. And so it's the center of the light. That's another way of thinking about it. Or it's the center of the territory, or it's the home, or it's the fire in the wilderness, or it's the tree in the center where you live. It's all of those things at once. It's inhabited territory with you at the center. And the rock represents tradition, because people tend to inscribe their traditions on rock, right? Or to build them into rock, like the pyramids. So you could think about that as a pyramid, as an Egyptian pyramid, and it's the right way to think about it. You could also think about it as a dominance hierarchy with the apex predator at the top, and that's the lion. So it makes sense that the lion would be in the light on the rock. That's a pyramid in the middle of the territory, right? That makes sense to people psychologically. So, because that's what the state is. The state is a hierarchy with something at the top that occupies a space that has been illuminated and made safe by consciousness. That's what the state is, and that's all represented right away in this movie. And all the animals come to observe what's happening in the pyramid and at the top, because they need to know what happens at the top, partly to organize their world, that's the pyramid, but also to see how the organizational principle works. And that's why they're all gathering. And so they're gathering in the light in the morning to observe something new that's going to be born, that's of significant importance, and that's the birth of the hero. And this little bird here, Zazu, right? Zazu is like Horus, the Egyptian god, who was a falcon and an eye at the same time. And he is the king's eyes in this movie, right? He flies up above, outside of the pyramid, so he can see everything that goes on and reports to the king. And so partly what that indicates is that the thing that's at the top of the pyramid needs to be an eye. And that's partly why you see an eye on the top of the pyramid on the back of the American dollar bill. It's exactly the same idea. Or if you look at the Washington Monument, which is a pyramid at the top, you see that it's capped with aluminum. And you think, well, why aluminum? And the answer to that was it was the most expensive metal at that time. And so the notion is that at the top of the pyramid, there's something that actually doesn't belong in the pyramid. It's something that goes up above the pyramid and can see everything. And so you could think about it this way, is that you're going to be in a lot of pyramids in your life, dominance hierarchies and different states and families and all of that. And they'll arrange themselves into a hierarchy. And there'll be something at the top. And the top is the thing that can do well across hierarchies. So it's not stuck in any one pyramid, and it's partly associated with vision and the ability to see a long, long distance. Also to see what you don't want to see and to report that back to the king. And so the king, fundamentally, as far as you guys are concerned from a psychological perspective, that's your superego. That's the Freudian perspective. Or it might be the moral system by which you comport yourself. But your eyes are the thing that updates that, right? You need it to orient yourself in the world. You need it to orient yourself among other people. But your eye and your capacity to pay attention, especially to what you don't want to pay attention to, is the thing that continually updates that model, exactly as Piaget laid out with children. So, and all of that's packed into the imagery in the first, few minutes of this movie. And that's actually why it relies on imagery, why this isn't just a lecture by a psychologist, when you go to see the movie. It's because the images, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and there's thousands of pictures in this movie, obviously, but maybe a picture is worth more words than you can actually use to describe it if the picture is profound enough. And we have many, many pictures like that. Any deeply symbolic picture is virtually inexhaustible in terms of semantically with regards to its explanation. Images are very, very dense. So anyways, the animals all gathered. Now the animals are also id representations from the Freudian perspective, and the id is the part of your psyche from the Freudian perspective that's animalistic and full of implicit drives, sexual and aggressive in particular, as far as Freud was concerned. And that's because those two drives, say unlike thirst or hunger, are much more difficult to integrate into proper social being and tend to be excluded and left unconscious. And so a lot of Freudian psychology, and I would say psychology in general, is focused on the integration of sexual impulses and aggressive impulses into the psyche. I would also add to that anxiety, because anxiety is also a major problem. Anxiety and negative emotion that's pain-like is also a major problem for people. And so the animals represent those id-like impulses that have to be organized hierarchically before you can become an integrated being in precisely the Piagetian manner, right? Because Piaget would say, well, the child comes into the world with reflexes, and maybe a more modern psychologist would also concentrate on the implicit motivations, and those have to be organized inside the child into some kind of hierarchy of unity before the child can organize him or herself into the broader unity of the state. And that's basically what's being represented here. And so Zazu, the eyes of the king, comes to check out the king, and that's, what's his name? What's the king's name? Mufasa, yeah, and he's a very regal-looking person, lion, and he stands up straight and tall, and that means that he's high in serotonin, because serotonin governs postural flexion, and if you're dominant and near the top of hierarchies, you tend to expand so that you look bigger than you could if you shrunk down. And so if you're a low dominant person, you wander around like this so that you look small and weak, and you don't pose a threat to anybody. But if you're at the top, you expand yourself so that you can command the space, and that's why he has that particular kind of regal posture. And if you look at his facial expression, you see that it's quite severe. He's capable of kindness, but he's also harsh and judgmental, and that's what society is like. That's what the superego is like. And what that means is that he's integrated his aggression. And I've seen this happen in my clinical clients when they come in and they're too agreeable. They look like Simba looks later in the movie when he's an adolescent, and he's sort of like a deer in the headlights. Everything is coming in and nothing is coming out. But when the person integrates their shadow and gets the aggressive part of themselves integrated into their personality, their faces harden. And if you look at people, you can tell, because the people who are too agreeable look childlike and innocent, and the people who, well, a hyper-aggressive person will look, mean and cruel. But let's see if that's good. That's still working. So, but I've seen people's face change in the course of therapy, men and women. So, and what happens is they start to look more mature, and it's more like they're judging the world as well as interacting with it properly once they integrate that more disagreeable part of them. It's very, very necessary, and that's part of the incorporation of the Jungian shadow or the incorporation of the unconscious from a Freudian perspective. But old Mustafa there, he's already got that. He's already got that covered. So, and he's capable, like, obviously he can smile and he's capable of the full range of expressions, but he's a tough looking character. And now, the baboon here, who's supposed to be basically just a fool when the story was first written, he turned into what's essentially a shaman across time. And so he represents the self from the Jungian perspective. Now, the self is everything you could be across time. And he lives in the tree. He lives in the tree of life. It's a baobab tree in this particular. So he's the spirit that inhabits the tree of life, and he's the eternal wise man. That's a way of thinking. So is the king, but he's sort of a superordinate king or an outside king in some sense. He's the repository of ancient wisdom, and the king is the manner in which that wisdom is currently being acted out in the world. And so they're friends, and that means that the king is a good king, because if the king was a bad king, he would be alienated from himself, and that would make him shallow and one-dimensional, and that would make him a bad ruler. No union with the traditions of the past. To be a good ruler, you have to rescue your father from the underworld and integrate that. And of course, that's a main theme in this entire movie. Okay, so the hero is born, and that's what the rising sun represents, and everybody goes, oh, isn't that cute? And the reason for that is because you're biologically wired, especially if you're agreeable, to respond with caretaking activity to cuteness, and cuteness is button nose, big eyes, small mouth, round head, symmetry, and helpless movements, and you'll respond to that across the entire class of mammalian creatures, even maybe down to lizards, you know. Isn't that cute? No, it's a lizard, but you know. So that's an archetype as well. That's the archetype of the vulnerable hero the vulnerable hero newly born. He looks cute and everybody goes, oh, and that's because the animators nailed that. They caught the essential features of cuteness. And he's also in the light, right? And so then the shaman, Mandrill, basically baptizes him. That's essentially what he's doing. And he uses something that's symbolic of the sun, which is this ripe fruit. And fruits are symbolic of the sun because, of course, they need the sun to ripen, and they're round like the sun. And people know that they need light. And so anyways, the animators make a relationship between the fruit that the shaman is going to break and the sun. And so he's also being baptized into the sun. And that means that he's being baptized into the light, or that he's being transformed into a hero. And so then everyone's happy, and that's basically, you know, the divine father and the divine mother and the divine son and the self who's taking care of that. And there's a union between the baby and the wise old man, because the baby is all the potential that's realized in the self. And there's an old idea that the way to full maturity is to find what you lost as a child and regain it. It's a brilliant idea, and that echoes through myths all over the world. And that means you have to regain your capacity. Once you're disciplined and you know how to do something, you have to regain your capacity for play and sort of for wide-eyed wonder. And that's maybe the childlike part of your spirit. And the reintegration of that childlike part with the adult grown-up part revivifies the adult grown-up part and allows the child to manifest itself in a disciplined way in the world. All right, so now Mufasa has taken Simba up to the top of the pyramid, right? So that's the aluminum place, let's say, or the place of the eye, where you can really see a long ways. And he's explaining to him what his kingdom is going to be. His kingdom is every place the light has touched. And that's so brilliant. So one of the things you'll notice if you move into a new apartment, you're like a cat. Cats don't like changing houses. And they have to zoom around in every corner to see exactly what the hell's going on there before they calm down. They need to know where they can hide and where the potential dangers are. And what you'll find if you move into a new place, that you will not be comfortable there until you've investigated, potentially cleaned and repaired every single square inch of it. The more attention you pay to it, the more it'll become yours. And that's far more than mere like material ownership, which is also relevant. But in order to feel comfortable somewhere and to dominate that place, to be enmeshed in that place, you have to attend to it. You have to shine light on every corner. And you have to do that with yourself and with your relationships as well. And so anyways, Mufasa tells Simba that his kingdom is everything that the light shines on. And that's exactly right. And then there's a metaphor there too, which is that what you've shone light on, which is what you've come to understand and master, is surrounded by an other world of all the things that you don't understand. and some of those would be natural things, and some of them would be tyrannical things, and some of those would be things you don't want to know about yourself. But they're outside of where you've managed to shine the light. And so that's exactly what Mufasa tells Simba. He says, we live in this pyramid, we're at the top, there's a domain of light around it that's explored territory. Outside of that, there's unexplored territory, and that's partly the unconscious, because you fill it with fantasy, and it's partly what you just don't know. And then Mufasa tells Simba, and it's sort of like God telling Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden not to eat the apple. Mufasa tells Simba, there's this outside place that's dark, that's not part of your kingdom, and you should not go there. And that's really interesting, because Simba doesn't even know about that place yet. And so Mufasa is doing something very contradictory there. It's like telling him that it exists, and heightening his curiosity, but also saying that he shouldn't go there, almost ensuring that that's exactly what Simba is going to do. You see this in the Pinocchio movie too, where Pinocchio is planning to jump into the ocean to go get Geppetto from the underworld, and he's following, his conscience is along with him, Jiminy Cricket, and the cricket is warning him about all the dangers that he'll face down there, and telling him that he will be fish food personally. And while he's doing that, Pinocchio ties a knot around his donkey tail, around a rock, so he can sink, and the little cricket helps him tie the knot. So while he's warning him about the adventure he's going to undertake, at the same time he's encouraging him to do it. And there's that paradoxical thing, which is that if you go outside what you know, it will cause a fall, because it'll damage your knowledge structures and you'll go down into chaos. And that can really destroy you, so you shouldn't do it. But by the same token, if you do it, and you do it successfully, then the new you that re-arises can be stronger and more complete than the previous you. So you should do it, and you shouldn't do it. And that's, anyone sensible says, look, don't bother, right? But sensible isn't enough. That's the thing. You have to also be not sensible enough in order to live. And your typical hero, and Harry Potter is a really good example, is always a rule breaker, always. But he, you know, the rules he breaks are, like, there's judiciousness behind the rule breaking. The hero breaks a rule in the service of a higher good, but he's still breaking the rules, and that's what puts him outside the boundary of the social establishment. So